Today we travel back to 17th century France, a land of craft, faith, and quiet ambition. This is the story of Luc and Élise Moreau, two ordinary people who crossed an ocean not to escape their lives, but to build something greater. Through their courage and learning, they helped shape a world that still bears their mark. This is the journey from France. Welcome back to the Ancestral Findings Podcast. The bells of La Rochelle echoed across the harbor, mingling with the calls of sailors and the slap of ropes against masts. The air smelled of salt and tar, and beneath it all, the faint sweetness of spring rain. Crates of tools, barrels of flour, and bundles of cloth lined the wharf, provisions for the long crossing. Luc Moreau stood near the gangway of the St. Anne, his hands resting on the wooden chest that held his livelihood, saws, planes, chisels, and a small mallet his father had carved for him years ago. He was not poor, not in the way many who left France were. He had work, skill, and the respect of his guild. But he wanted something more than steady wages and small rooms. He wanted a life built by his own design. Beside him, Élise adjusted her shawl against the wind. She was young, barely 20, with clear eyes and quick thoughts. She carried a small Bible, a few cooking pots, and a sewing kit, the marks of a woman chosen as one of the filles du roi, the king's daughters sent to New France to form the heart of its future families. "You could still change your mind," she said quietly. Luc smiled faintly. "If I did, what would I tell the king?" They laughed softly, but both looked out at the gray water with the same unspoken mix of fear and hope. Life in France had been stable, but narrow. Luc came from a family of joiners near Poitiers, craftsmen who built the furniture of other men's homes, but never owned enough land to build their own. His father's workshop was neat, lined with oak boards and tools that shone with use. It was honest work, but there was little chance for advancement. When royal recruiters came through that spring, offering land and a trade in the colonies, Luc listened. The offer wasn't just for laborers, it was for builders, men of craft, men who could help shape a new society. Elise's path was different. Orphaned at 14, she had been educated in a convent run by Ursuline sisters. She could read, write, and sing plain chant. The nuns spoke often about the colonies, about the girls who went to start families in a land where the church guided life from the ground up. When she was offered a chance to go, she said yes without hesitation. Fate, or Providence, placed them on the same ship, married in a small chapel before the voyage. They barely knew each other, but they shared something deeper than comfort. They shared conviction. The sea was a world of its own. Endless blue-gray days that blurred into the rhythm of prayer and survival. The St. Anne was sturdy, built for trade, but her decks creaked like old bones. Luc repaired barrels when they split and helped mend sails torn by the wind. Élise cooked with the other women, learning quickly how to stretch rations. At night, they sat together on deck, the stars so bright it seemed they could touch heaven. When the storms came, and they came often, Luc lashed himself to the rail to help the sailors. Élise prayed below, her voice steady amid the cries. In one storm, a mast cracked. In another, a sailor was lost to the waves. Yet through all of it, the captain said they were blessed. No ship that left La Rochelle that year made better time. When they sighted land, the dark forests of the St. Lawrence rising from mist, the crew cheered. Luc took Elise's hand. "It doesn't look like France," he said. "No," she answered, "but it looks like a beginning." Quebec in the 1660s was a settlement of barely 2,000 souls. The stone walls of the citadel guarded a cluster of wooden houses and small fields carved from the forest. But to those who had crossed the ocean, it felt vast with promise. The governor himself greeted the newcomers. "You are not merely settlers," he told them. "You are the root of a nation." Luc and Élise were assigned land near Trois-Rivières, along a curve of the St. Lawrence. The Company of New France provided tools, seed, and a cow. The church provided guidance. They built their first cabin with logs Luc felled by hand. Élise cooked over an open hearth, her skirts damp from snowmelt. Every evening she read aloud from her small Bible, her voice a quiet reminder of home. Their neighbors were a mix of soldiers, farmers, and artisans. Many could read, and all knew the value of order. They shared labor and news, and when disputes arose, they turned to the priest who kept not just the sacraments, but the settlement's peace. By the next spring, they had a fenced garden and a roof that didn't leak. Their world was small, but it was theirs. Luc's skill with wood quickly made him indispensable. He built doors for the chapel, frames for the new homes, and even a pulpit for the parish church. When the Jesuits needed desks for the school, he fashioned them from pine. "Your hand will be remembered," the priest told him one day. Luc smiled at the thought, not of fame, but of permanence. Élise, meanwhile, taught the settlers' children their letters using scraps of parchment and bits of charcoal. She had learned from the nuns that education was an act of faith, and she carried that mission with quiet pride. When she gave birth to their first child, they named him Etienne, after her father. The priest baptized him under a cross Luc had carved himself. By their 5th year, the Maros were no longer newcomers but founders. They had a house with windows, a workshop with apprentices, and a life ordered by work and worship. Unlike many colonies, New France was guided not just by soldiers, but by scholars. The Jesuits and Ursulines believed education would hold the settlement together as surely as muskets and walls. Luc and Élise sent their eldest to the mission school, where he learned to read Latin prayers and basic arithmetic. The boy would come home reciting words his father didn't understand, but loved to hear. Their second child, Marie, learned to write. She copied hymns in a hand so careful, the priest used her work as an example. When the census taker came through in 1681, he noted, "Luc Moreau, carpenter, aged 43, wife Élise, aged 36, children, Etienne, Marie, Pierre, owns 30 arpents of cleared land, 1 cow, 1 horse, 2 hired men." They were no longer just surviving, they were prospering. The winters remained fierce. Frost cracked doors and hunger tested patience. Some years crops failed, some years fever came down the river with the traders, but Luc's work kept them afloat. He built boats for the voyageurs and furniture for the governor's hall. Élise tended a garden of herbs that the nuns praised for its healing use. When word came that France had gone to war again, the settlement tightened its ties. They prayed for peace and worked harder. The Jesuit father wrote in his diary, "These people live with a discipline born of faith and knowledge. They read more than they fight." By their 20th year in the colony, Luc and Élise had 3 children who could read and write, and 2 apprentices who would carry on Luc's trade. He often thought of his father's small shop in Poitiers, neat, proud, but limited. Here, the horizon stretched without end. Sometimes ships brought news from France. The letters told of high taxes, bad harvests, and wars fought over borders. Friends who had once envied them now wrote asking if they could come. Luc read one aloud by lamplight. "It seems," he said softly, "we left at the right time." Élise nodded. "We were sent here to build, not to flee. That makes all the difference." They never spoke of returning. Their children's voices carried accents no longer quite French but not yet anything else, the first hint of a new people taking shape. Years passed. Etienne became a teacher in Quebec. Marie married a merchant who traded furs along the river. Pierre stayed to help his father expand the workshop. The Moreau name appeared often in parish records, not just as baptisms, but as sponsors, godparents, and signers. One day, Luc watched his grandson trace his name in ink on a page and thought how far a single decision had carried them. "We left France with empty hands," he said quietly, "but full minds. And that's what made all this possible." When Élise fell ill in her later years, she asked Luc to read aloud from her Bible, the same small book she had carried from the convent to the New World. He struggled with some of the words, his eyes failing him, but she smiled. "You've built more than houses," she whispered. "You've built a family that will remember how." When she passed, Luc carved a wooden cross and placed it at the edge of their land, overlooking the river. Beneath it, he etched her name in the words, "Dieu nous garde." He sat there often, watching the light fade over the fields, and thought of the harbor at La Rochelle. how it had all begun with the sound of bells and the courage to imagine something better. The parish still stands, its records neatly kept, its bell still ringing. Somewhere in its archives, the names Luc and Élise Moreau remain written in brown ink, ordinary names among thousands. But their story is written in more than words. It lives in the schools, the churches, and the families who carry French blood and spirit through North America. They were not nobles or beggars. They were builders, thinkers, believers, people who crossed the sea not to escape but to create. And in that creation they found what so many had left behind: dignity, knowledge, and the steady peace of belonging. Do you have ancestors who came from France? Were they settlers in Quebec, Acadians on the coast, or Huguenots seeking freedom? Their stories, like Luc and Élise's, are part of a much larger tapestry. Share your own family journey in the comments on YouTube or Facebook, and join others exploring their past in Journeys of Our Ancestors. Each memory adds another thread to the story of how the world grew smaller, one ship and one family at a time. If you've got a hard-to-find ancestor you're stuck on, I'd love to hear about it. Just head over to ancestralfindings.com and click on Contact to send me a message. While you're there, take advantage of our free weekly genealogy lookups. Explore thousands of articles and enjoy hundreds of podcast episodes. We've been helping family history researchers since 1995. And if you're looking for even more, check out our Genealogy Gold Q&A series over on Patreon. Thanks for listening, and as always, happy searching.